Wow. Has anybody told you yet today that you're beautiful? You're a beautiful audience. You know, for the last two Rejebians, I've been looking at a little lens on a camera, imagining that I was talking to you. And how wonderful it is, how beautiful you are. And I just want to say a big thank you. I think we all should thank David Rejebian and Richard Stanford and the committee for keeping Rejebian alive during this pandemic. Thank you. As I was putting this review together last summer, I was wishing that I could just get in a room and laugh with my friends. Did you feel that way? So I started thinking about some books I had on my shelf that were really, really funny. And I thought, maybe I could incorporate all of that into a book review, and I called it Texsanity. A friend of mine asked, "What is that? I've looked everywhere, can't find it." I said, "It's not even in the dictionary. I made that word up." And I made up the definition, too. It means the opposite of the insanity of living through a global pandemic of the century, which we've all done and survived, but it's still ongoing, so be careful and safe out there. But anyway, I just got involved with some Texas storytellers that struck me funny, and I put together this review to honor them. And I would be remiss if I didn't, first of all, mention our mutual good, great friend, Rosemary Rumbley, who is a consummate storyteller, and she is a humorist. And her vast knowledge of Texas makes what I know look like diddly. I called her and I said, "Rosemary, I'm going to get in your lane a little bit." And she just laughed like as if I could. No, she was super sweet and supportive, as she has been throughout my career, and I wish her well. But one of the problems with my tackling a subject like this is I'm not really a Texan. I look like one? Oh, good. I take that as a compliment. I've been here 50 years. My husband brought me here. But before that, it's a little timely, so I will tell you that my people, a couple of generations back, immigrated here from the Ukraine. They'd been kicked out of Germany, then later Poland, because they were German Mennonites, and they didn't believe in fighting in wars. And Catherine the Great, lovely lady, wish she was still around. But anyway, she lured them to the Ukraine because it was just a desolate place at the time. She heard they were farmers, great farmers, and she would let them be conscientious subjectors. Well, when she died, Nicholas the Tsar was not so inclined. My people, both sides of my family, came to the Ukraine, from the Ukraine to the United States, and they looked for a place as desolate and dreary as the Ukraine had been. So they settled in Nebraska. And I was born there because my people, my parents were there at the time, so yeah, I got to Texas as soon as I could, but you know what? I learned in my research that you have to have 5 generations of your family born in Texas to call yourself a Texan. Okay, raise your hand if you qualify. Let me see you. There, see? You're the only people, by the way, who can come up afterwards and correct me if I make a mistake. So anyway, the other problem I had with putting this together is I'm not funny. I have people out here. You can ask any of my friends, family. I'm just not funny. They roll their eyes if I try to be at the table, but I have to have backup. So I'm going to share with you my sources. You might decide that you need some backup sometime too. The first book that I'm going to steal from is called Fixin' to be Texan by Helen Bryant. She wrote for our newspapers, and her husband, John Anders, did as well. And he wrote in the front of this book that she was funnier than he was. She hails from Virginia, he said, but she has an affection for Texans. She even up and married one. Her book is so cute. I wish you could see the inside of it, but you can open any page and get yourself a laugh. She just writes these wonderful, wonderful stories, and I consider her to be a Virginia-born, funny Texas storyteller. The second book that I'm going to steal from is called A Yankee Chick's Survival Guide to Texas by Sophia Dembling. And she is a Yankee chick, born in Upper West Side, New York, and she came here to write also for our newspapers. She went on to write for national publications and stayed in Texas. Why? Well, because she said she had acquired here a husband, a house, 2 dogs, and a peculiar accent. And she also said anytime she came back to DFW, she immediately looked for the nearest Mexican restaurant. My kind of gal. And the third book that I am going to mention is A Guide to Texas Etiquette, or How to Get to Heaven or Hell Without Going Through Dallas-Fort Worth. This is written by Kinky Friedman. And I will have to tell you that I've borrowed heavily from Kinky. He, however, is like me and the other 2 authors, not a born-here Texan. He was born in Chicago. However, he cranks out Texsanity all the time in every which way. In the hill country where he lives and writes, he has an ancient Manuel Smith Corona typewriter, and he came here really by way of Nashville. He attempted to be a Jewish cowboy singer. He made some friends in low places. One of them, I think, was Willie Nelson, and maybe that's how he got to Texas. But I will tell you, if you go home and Google Kinky Friedman and his song called Jesus in Pajamas from this Jewish cowboy singer, it will bring you to your knees. So don't forget that. My husband has a doctorate in composition. I made him listen, and he had a similar reaction to it. It is amazing. But he ran for governor here. One of my program chairmen gave me his campaign button. She found it in her miscellaneous drawer. And so I know that it was in 2006 because it's right on this button. And he said he'd run for governor, and if the Texans allowed him to be their first Jewish governor, how hard could it be, he said? And the first thing he would do was demand a recount. And the second thing he said he would do was lower the speed limit from 60 to 54.95. But you know, he did evidently know some things about Texas laws. And he's got in his book this chapter called Strange Texas Laws. I'm just going to read you a few, because you may have been wondering what our elected officials do with their time and our money. Here's one, for instance. When two trains meet each other at a railroad crossing, each shall come to a full stop, and neither shall proceed until the other has gone. Here's another. It is illegal to take more than 3 sips of beer at a time while standing in Texas. Or, how about this one? You can be legally married by publicly introducing a person as your husband or wife 3 times. Anybody do that? You sure could save some money. It's illegal to milk another person's cow in Texas. And here's one I really think should be implemented, and I don't believe it has, because I've been burglarized twice. A recently passed anti-crime law requires criminals to give their victims 24-hour notice. Either orally in writing, and to explain the nature of the crime to be committed. That would help. Now, there's another law. It's only law in Port Arthur, Texas, but I think it should be state law, really. In Port Arthur, obnoxious odors may not be emitted in an elevator. Well, you see, I've got some sources, and so I can be funny if I'm quoting someone else. And let's talk about the fact that Texas has a motto. If you've forgotten it, it's friendship. We have signs all over the place that say, don't mess with Texas. Not very friendly. Somebody wants to secede from the Union and become our own country, which I don't think is very friendly. And then there are a few other things I don't think is friendly either, but I'm not going to go there, as Rosemary would say. And Texas has that motto, and it has 267,339 square miles. And 41 counties, and even King Ranch that are bigger than Rhode Island. Do you remember these? Remember these? We got these free at the filling station. This is a map I found in my closet, in my husband's closet, really. I'll give him credit. And it was issued when Mark White was governor. I can't really show it to you. I don't have it up there. But I will tell you that our state is big. It's so big that it wouldn't fit on this map. They had to cut off the panhandle and put it up in the corner. But I did notice for the first time, I did not know this, so I'm giving you information if you're taking a trip. El Paso is closer to California than it is to Dallas. In a state this big, we need lots of town names, and I'm just going to have to tell you some of them. For instance, we have 2 towns in Texas called Jumbo, and I don't think either one of them are very big. The easternmost one, I think, was named after an elephant that came through in a circus. But it makes a little more sense that we have 6 towns named Lone Star, thank goodness for zip codes. We have 8 Friendships, 14 Fairviews, 18 Midways. But can you think of any good reason to have 3 towns named Pumpkin Center? Pumpkin Center. Big Spring. What does that mean? Anyway, if you have a need, like if you're hungry, Texas is a good place because you can go to a town named Bacon or oatmeal or trout or salty or rice or Sweetwater, noodle, turkey, Sugarland. If you're depressed, you can go to Happy, Pep, Smiley, Paradise, or Sweet Home. If you're cold or tired, we have towns for you. Energy, Comfort, Blanket. For laughs, what about Frog? Frog Knot, Bug Tussle, Toad Suck. Any of those make you smile? If you wanted always to be a cowgirl or a cowboy, we've got the best names of towns you can go cut and shoot. Point Blank, Gun Barrel City, Gun Sight, Bootleg, Die Scrappin' Valley, or Eulogy. I know that exists. My husband's grandfather was born there. Now, if you've got a sweetie, I have got a honeymoon trip all planned for you, because you go first to Lotta, Texas. Lotta, then Loving, then Joy, then Wink, then Climax, then Conception, then Goodnight, then Need More. If you're a cheapskate, you can go to Squeeze Penny instead. There is no logic to the naming of Texas towns, because West Texas is not in West Texas. It's centrally located. Desert Texas isn't down in Big Bend where it should be. No, it's up north, where the nearest patch of sand is likely to be your cat box. And out in West Texas, we have a town named Halfway. It doesn't look to be halfway to anywhere. But if you're coming from Muleshoe and you get to Earth, you're halfway to halfway. And if you want to stay on Earth, that's fine. Nice people there, but you can also go to Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, or Pluto and still be in Texas. If you're going to Paris, Athens, Italy, Rome, designate the country, because Texas has all those towns too. And I have it on good authority that people in Placid can get riled on occasion. And some of those people in uncertain Texas are just as determined as the ones who live in certain. Have you ever been to Uncertain? Anybody? Oh, a few of you. Isn't it the cutest little town? We were there when the mayor had a town hall meeting at a card table in the driveway of the fire station. But what really I thought was the funniest thing was driving in, and there was this big sign that said Church of Uncertain. My kind of people. I think it's cute that Ding Dong, Texas is in Bell County. It's easy enough for the people who live in Best, Texas to move on up. They can go to Very Best. I do not understand why any town council would get together and name their town Hogeye. That's just Texsanity. It's Texsanity. Now, one of the things that we should mention is the weather in Texas. It gets hot here. It's really hot today. I can tell you right now, appreciate you getting out in this heat. It's kind of a bragging point sometimes, maybe not this year, but I've heard people say that you can fry an egg on the sidewalk in the summer. Try that. I think it would be gritty. I'm not fond of grits. Haven't tried it. The only good thing about the heat in Texas is I don't worry quite so much about going out to my car and somebody's hunkered down in the back seat waiting to kill me. Not going to happen. Nope. My husband has a joke, and it's not very funny, but he's here, so I'm going to tell it. He says Texas has 4 seasons: almost summer, summer, still summer, and Christmas. You see what you've done? You laughed. Now I hear that 100 more times. But we wanted to get cool by the Texas OU game, right? I got my worst sunburn at my son's game in the Cotton Bowl when he was playing OU. And certainly by Halloween, we needed chili. But in January, we just might have suddenly spring one day. Birds come back, think it's time to build a nest. The next day it's winter again. We have to cover up our pansies. But we have too much stormy weather in Texas, don't you think? I mean, we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have dust storms, we have flatline windstorms, we have ice storms, snowstorms, sleet, way too many storms. If you're driving through West Texas, Big Spring, it's like watching TV if a storm's up there. But if you are watching TV, your favorite program is going to get canceled. Why? Because the weather people take over. And they have this thing strapped to their hand and a map behind them. And they talk weather speak about wall clouds and funnel clouds and lightning strikes and the dreaded hook. And they say it over and over, update every few minutes. And then when they get tired of hearing themselves talk, they'll switch to a reporter out somewhere, some fool chasing a storm in a truck. Why would you do that? Or someone out in West Texas measuring a hailstone. Or somebody wading up to their hips in the floodwaters. Seen them with houses and cars floating by behind them. And then there's those that hang on to a lamppost in the Gulf. I swear somebody's going to fly off to the Caribbean one of these days. They're going to see it on live TV. We have lots of storms. But if it happens to be a tornado, and they happen to change from a tornado watch to a tornado warning, it's time to put down your knitting, your book, and go to an interior bathroom and jump in the bathtub and pull a mattress over your head. Why would you do anything so silly? Because you don't have a basement. Trust me, go home and check. You don't. If you have a basement, raise your hand. We're all going there next time. If it's a slippery kind of a storm, like an ice storm or a snowstorm, they will tell us, don't drive, stay home. Because we don't salt our roads here in Texas. We put sand down, and it lasts for the first 10 cars that go over it. And then it piles up on the side to give us all a sinus infection. But we don't care. We're not going to listen to that anyway. We're going to get in our car and drive to the grocery store and stand in line with our neighbors to stock up on essentials like peanut butter, duct tape, string cheese, bottled water, and above all else, toilet paper. And we've all learned the hard way that if it's a pandemic we're dealing with, we fill up our garage with toilet paper next time. Well, we have so many storms, but we do have spring, and I have good news about bluebonnets. It is not against the law to pick bluebonnets. You can just go out and pick all you want to. Just be a meanie, stomp them down, throw your grandchild down there on, take pictures. You're not going to get arrested. Just watch out for anthills and snakes because they're waking up about the same time. And then it's spring and we just enjoy it until everything turns brown. And it's really, really over. Let's talk about talking Texan. You know, we have a language that didn't get a second person plural put in it. That's the reason for all y'all. Well, y'all first, then all y'all is a plural of that. And then there's a pluperfect. It's all M. All M's my cows. You have to do this. I'm dating myself, but I will tell you I can remember when an entire family was designated by Mom and M. Mom and M is cooking up a mess of catfish or a mess of greens, right? Mess in that context is a noun On our signs, don't mess with Texas, I believe it's a verb. If you're talking to a friend saying your kids, grandkids are a mess, that's probably a direct object. It's a good word to know. But we all know some Texan to talk, but we don't use it very often. Just keep it in your back pocket. You know, Ann Richards, our former governor, she talked Texan on national TV. Became America's sweetheart. Just remember this, especially from if you're a Yankee chick or a dude. We do not drink soda or pop in Texas. We drink Coke and Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper does not have a period, if you know your stuff. All right, that's probably enough laughing. I'm a book reviewer, and you are book lovers, most of you, I think. I'm going to take a U-turn here, and I'm going to introduce a book by one of our favorite, our most successful, and probably funniest Texas storytellers. He told me sometimes this goes to sleep. There he is, Larry McMurtry. He left us last March. He was born in Archer City, Texas in 1936. He died at the age of 4. By that time, he had written 46 books, all kinds of books. You probably know his Westerns best, but he was a voracious reader and he collected rare books. He's pictured here in Booked Up, one of his 4 bookstores he had, and when he sold it at auction, it had 500,000 rare books, almost. Larry McMurtry was an amazing storyteller. Not only was he funny, his brand of humor was different. It was embedded, and it was subtle, but you can't help smiling reading one of his books. He, among other things, got a Pulitzer Prize for Lonesome Dove. And the 18 Emmys that the TV version of it won, he added to the 34 Oscar nods he'd received. Why did his books turn into movies so often? Terms of Endearment, The Last Picture Show, Texasville. I think maybe it was the dialogue, for one thing. And critics often mention the fact that he created such wonderful female characters, very, very rare among male authors. He was a crusty curmudgeon, but his female characters were wily and wild and warm and witty, tough and tender. And so it is with the book I'm going to review for you now called Boone Slick. Not very many people have read this, and it's a shame, I think. It's a wonderful book. My husband read it first and insisted that I read it, and I just stuck it in this book review. I think it's a small book, so we can get through it in the time I have left. Mary Margaret Mitchell is the main character in this book. She's just like all of his other female characters. And the book is narrated by her 15-year-old eldest son, Shay Cecil. He has a brother, GT, 2 sisters called Neva and baby Marcy. There are a lot of colorful minor characters that I had to leave out in the interest of time, of course. But this is a book that was patterned after a real story of 19th century haulers and traders. And it's a book about a trip to track down the pa of this family. And maybe I'll just let Shay Cecil tell you the rest of that story. Here he is with Boone Slick. My Uncle Seth was of the notion bad things mostly happen on cloudy days. A thunderhead or two don't hurt, but you get too much cloudy weather and it makes people restless and mean, females particularly. Him and me and GT were walking down to the Missouri River to see if we could find something to catch or trap or shoot for Ma to cook, preferably something with a good taste to it. And he was carrying on, Uncle Seth. He said, you've got to walk small around Mary Margaret, a little smaller on cloudy days. It was almost this cloudy that day in Richmond when I tripped over that darn wagon tongue and shot off half my kneecap. Got myself gimpy for the rest of my life. This was a story we knew well. My Uncle Seth was a tall, fidgety fellow. And before that accident, he and my pa were partners carrying goods from the Missouri River up to the forts up north. And after that accident, Pa said he'd have to be a stay-home partner. And before the accident, he said my uncle could walk faster and walk longer than anybody in the plains. And it irked Uncle Seth no end that Pa made him a stay-home partner after that. I could still drive a wagon too, he said. But could you outrun a Cheyenne Indian or even a Potawatomi? I doubt it. And Uncle Seth doubted Pa could either. But he was doomed to stay with us, and right now he was listening to GT complain that he'd talked so loud that he'd only caught one crawdad so far. About that time, we heard a shot come from the direction of the house. And the next thing you know, my 14-year-old sister Neva came flying down the path. She could run faster than anybody in the family, even Pa. But on this cloudy day, she outran her breath. She could only gasp when she got there. They's a big bunch of thieves, and they done stole all our mules. Well, now, we heard a shot. I hope nobody ain't hurt your ma. Despite what he said about women and cloudy days, we all knew he was mighty partial to my ma. No, it was Ma. She shot a horse. Well, maybe you better run down, honey, to Boone's Lick and get the sheriff. He's the one to deal with thievery now. He's already here. It was his horse Ma shot. Oh, uh-oh. Where was the sheriff at the time? Sitting on his horse. Fell over and he nearly mashed his leg. Well, that sent GT running off to the house with his one crawdad, and when we got down there, Sheriff Barney Stone was trying to get his saddle off his dead horse, and he finally just gave up and sat down on it. She shot my horse right out from under me, and you might remember, Seth, I once courted Mary Margaret when things was different. Yeah, well, that might explain why she shot your horse and not you. This was after Uncle Seth discovered it was the sheriff's own posse that had borrowed our mules. Ma appeared at the door then, holding baby Marcy, blowing spit bubbles. The baby, not Ma. And she handed the baby off to Uncle Seth, and Marcy started cooing because she thought Uncle Seth was her pa. She'd never been introduced to her own. Ma circled that horse, and she poked it with her finger. Why, it is a horse, isn't it? I thought it was a big fat elk just walking up to my back door. And I said, thank you, Jesus, because we've been eating mush for 3 weeks. And I thought we were going to have us some meat to eat. And then with a faraway look in the direction of the sheriff, who was still sitting on his horse with his mouth wide open, and a bug could have flown right in there if one had been nearby. I guess I was just too hungry to see straight. I'm mighty hungry, and so's my whole family. It had been a hungry month. Ma wouldn't even let us kill a chicken. A chicken's just an egg-laying machine. Now, we can exist on eggs if we have to. I'd just rather not. Well, Ma wasn't going to waste an ounce of that horse either. She cracked open the bones to get out the marrow, and when the butchering was done, we had more meat to eat than we'd had since the war ended. And my pa took to carrying goods from the Missouri River up to the forts up north to make a living, and we didn't see much of him, and we didn't see much of his living either. Ma did the best she could. Sometimes she'd go up to the graveyard and sit on a bench near the grave of her sister and Grandma Crackenthorpe and the 4 baby brothers that hadn't made it through our terrible Missouri winters. And we all knew she went up there to cry. But one day I just happened by, so I went over and sat by her. And she started crying so hard that she woke up the baby. Marcy started crying. I didn't know what to do. It's usually Uncle Seth that gets her feeling better when she's feeling low. And so I just sat there. And finally she stopped crying, and Marcy stopped crying, and she put her hand on my shoulder. She said, Shay, the ability to stay put when a woman's crying is one most men don't have. And I felt a little manly about that. Well, this was an interesting time. We had meat to eat, but Ma still wasn't happy, and we couldn't make her feel any better. But I had another conversation with her when she said that after this meat was all gone, this horse she'd shot, we were going to take us a trip, all of us. I said, well, where are we going? And she said, wherever your pa is. I'm out of patience with him. He was only here 2 days, 9 months before baby Marcy was born. And she's fixing to crawl. He's never laid eyes on her. I did wonder what Ma would do if Pa got himself killed up there in Indian country. You know, I kind of secretly hoped that she'd just marry Uncle Seth because he already took care of us. He knew what to do. He had made himself a little camp by our cabin, and I heard him tell Ma one day that he liked to just lie out there and look up at the heavens, and she said, well, you better look all you want because you're not getting any closer than that. And she was kind of sassy that way. But I got another earful when I went out riding with Uncle Seth, and I said, well, Pa's going to really be happy if Ma can track him down and he can see us. And Uncle Seth just gave me a look. Your Pa is a wagoner because he has no tolerance for family life, see? He doesn't even like white folks around. He doesn't want me up there with him. He's partial to Cheyenne, a few Sioux. They're quiet, don't talk much. Why are we going to find him then, I said. And I didn't get an answer to that. What happened next was Ma got herself some burlap sacks, and for 3 days she filled them with onions and potatoes and our clothes and kitchen and stuff and tools. And every time she filled the sack, she'd send one of us out to put it on the wagon. And when the wagon was full, she closed the door to the cabin, didn't look back. And you know what? It only takes a minute to leave a place that you've lived in all your life. And all of us, from baby Marcy to Grandpa Crackenthorpe, found a sack to be comfortable on. And Ma walked around to the front where there's a bench on the wagon. She looked up at Uncle Seth. She said, I sure hope you got us a boat. That was your only job, Seth, but we need to take part of this journey by boat. This wagon won't last the whole way. And then she scooted him over, took the reins. She was going to drive those mules. And he didn't like it one bit. Even Grandpa Crackenthorpe said, I didn't raise her up to be that sassy. Well, we got down to the river, and there wasn't a boat. Trying to cover for himself, Uncle Seth said, I think maybe he's just a little late, but there was no one to ask but an old Indian man. He was more interested in untangling his fishing line than this noisy wagon load of people pulling 4 mules and a gray mare. So Ma sent Neva down to talk to him because she's not shy of anybody or anything. And she came back and said, he says it burnt, so that's it. We have to go back home. About that time, Wild Bill Hickok rode up on his fine horse. Now, he hung around Boone's Lick some, and he came to say goodbye, especially to Neva, because when she was hungry, she'd run down to Boone's Lick and find him in the saloon, and he'd buy her a steak dinner or 2. He saw that Indian and started yelling at him. That is Charlie 7 Days from Snake River. He is the best guide this side of the Missouri, and he saved my life during the war. Oh, my God. Well, Ma's ears perked up, and Uncle Seth didn't like that. Ma went up to that Indian and said, we would be thrilled to have you be our guide. You just paddle your canoe down along the shore to Glasgow. That's the next town. We'll find us a boat, I hope, there. And he just nodded. Uncle Seth said, I wish you'd let me drive these mules, Mary Margaret. And she just ignored him. He hopped off the wagon. He was mad. He got the mare, rode off in a huff down the road. And Ma invited me to come sit in his seat and be a lookout. Wasn't long before I saw something to look out for. There was this huge man in a brown robe like priests wear, and he had a frizzy beard down to his waist. He was getting a sticker out of his foot, sitting on a stump, evidently walking barefoot. No shoes, no satchel, nothing. I told Ma to clip on by. He might be a bandit, dressed in a priest's robe, but she stopped. Are you injured, Father? She said. And he stood up and saw Grandpa Crackenthorpe. That is Hugo Crackenthorpe snoring away up there, isn't it? I haven't seen him since the trouble at the Bad Axe River. That was about 34 years ago. When he started spouting stories, Ma had to interrupt. I'm sorry, we have to get to Glasgow. You can ride along with us since you're injured. And he hopped up on there, and they chatted away the afternoon. We got to Glasgow. There was a boat. Uncle Seth was tipsy, and he was dancing a jig, and the boatsmen, 4 of them, were a band, and Charlie 7 Days had gotten there already, and so they all started yelling at each other. Father Billy remembered that old Indian from his boyhood, and Grandpa was awake, and Ma turned to me, and she said, you kids that thought I run off Uncle Seth don't know him like I do. I couldn't run him off if I tried. And she handed me the reins to the mules and hopped off the wagon and went down and started dancing with Uncle Seth. Well, that night we slept under the wagon for the first time, and we'd sleep there from now on. And the next day we tethered everything onto the boat and started off. About 2 hours out of Glasgow, there was a downpour. We all got stinky and sweaty and got in a little shelter on the back of the boat, except for Charlie 7 Days, who took off his shirt and had himself a shower. Then he got in his canoe, said he was going to go look for snakes. When the sun came out, he invited me to come along with him, and I started feeling manly again, a little less homesick. And so it was that we were on an adventure, my family and me, and we hunted and we fished for our food. And that first night, GT, who couldn't even catch more than one crawdad, caught a 25-pound catfish. And Father Billy was a good cook. Ma rinsed the dishes in the muddy Missouri River, dark as coffee. And I thought we were having us an adventure until it turned deadly. There was a night when there was a storm. I woke up cold and chilled like a dog. And I looked around, and one of our mules had gone overboard. And Uncle Seth had swum ashore to try to find little Nicky. And everybody else was swimming around picking up kitchen utensils. And all of a sudden, Charlie 7 Days got out of the canoe and came up on the boat and said, where's your old one? I don't see him. Grandpa Crackenthorpe was nowhere to be found. We looked for 2 days, 2 cloudy days. GT and Neva were bawling their eyes out. They didn't even like Grandpa. We never found him. We had to push on. Mom felt so bad. She couldn't hardly stand it. We couldn't eat. We couldn't sleep. It was the first of many tragedies. We had one after another, and I can't tell you all of them because I'd run really, really late here. But there was a day in Kansas, the days had gotten shorter. Maybe we didn't notice, but GT and me went hunting on the island, on the Kansas shore, and it got dark before we expected, and we were lost. We usually just hunted along following the boat, but we didn't know where it was. We thought of Grandpa Crackenthorpe. We got panicked, and then suddenly and silently out of the dusk came Charlie 7 Days, and he just nodded at us. Turned around, led us back to the boat, never said a word. On the Platte River, it was decided that probably Paul was up in the forest, just maybe Montana. Maybe take us till Christmas to get there, and we'd better get off the boat. Christmas, Ma said. Do you know that I have not seen a tree since last Wednesday? That's almost a week without a tree. That's spooking me, Seth, she said. Well, about 6 more weeks and we'll be in a dense forest of trees, he said. Well, we were in the wagon now, and they were talking at night and getting along better. It was kind of nice to go to sleep to that at night and the fire. But things, like I said, got worse and worse. We had hard frost, and Uncle Seth handed us all a burlap sack, told us to go pick up frozen turds. That's what we need for our fires now. He said there's just no wood up here. And then we still had Father Billy with us. He was trying to get to Siberia, and he thought maybe this was a shortcut. And so he was walking barefoot in the sleet one morning, and about 20 Indians were up on a ridge. Our Pawnee brethren have come to see us, I think. The men folk thought that the Pawnee were a peaceful tribe, but they were talented thieves. So Charlie 7 Days posted himself by the animals, and Uncle Seth went up to meet him and came back and said, Mary Margaret, I talked to the leader. His name is Nose Turns Down. He's of the notion we should give him one of our mules. Ha, ha, said Ma. And as the Indians came closer and started to finger our arsenal, she gave them all the stink eye. I don't think they were comfortable with that, because they left eventually with only a pouch of coffee beans and a plug of tobacco. But that wasn't the last time we had Indians come. No, it wasn't, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. One day we were easing up out of a steep gully, and our back wheel came off the wagon, went rolling down the gully. And all of a sudden, Ma started yelling at us. My wagon box is broke. My baby's got cactus. Baby Marcy landed on a cactus. The kitchen stuff was everywhere. Go get my wheel. Get busy. So GT and me started down the gully, and then this big bear came out of a cave, big as a hill, big brown bear, and he growled at GT, and he got frozen in place right then and there. The only thing that saved my only living brother was the fact that Charlie 7 Days, little plump pony, was grazing nearby. So the bear took a look at that scrawny little kid and that nice plump pony, and he chose the pony. Gave Uncle Seth time to get off 2 shots. He's dead. I can see it from here. Now you boys get down there and get that wheel. So now we've got bears and Indians and storms. Charlie 7 Days, by the way, turned out to be the best at cutting up dead bears and the best at getting cactus out of babies, because he soaked all those places with warm water and got out the cactus and then smeared it with bear grease. Ma was real nice to him after that. There's no reason for any part of the United States to be this big, Ma said one day, when our wagon broke down for the umpteenth time. I have not seen a house since I don't know when, and I've forgotten what houses look like. It was snowing heavily. When we did see some buildings, it was Fort Laramie, our destination. And when we got closer, it looked like all the Indians were drunk on the outside and all the soldiers were drunk on the inside. And Ma just gave Uncle Seth a look. And he said, I'll go see if anybody's sober enough to know if Dick's around. He came back with bad news. Pa had gone further north to Fort Phil Kearny. And our trip was not over. But they invited us in to get our wagon fixed. And so since we're going to have to go further north, Father Billy and Charlie 7 Days decided they weren't going to go with us. I got up the next morning to get my coffee. The sun was shining. I saw Ma up at the north gate. She was using her hands to talk to a plump Indian woman who was tending her tent and a toddler. And Ma beckoned me over. Come see this fine little girl. She's Sue. And as I got closer, I saw that she was probably just a month or two younger than Marcy, who'd gotten her walking legs by now. And they were staring at each other at first, and then they started chasing each other and squealing. And I saw what Ma saw. They looked like identical twins, though the little girl was copper-colored and Marcy was white. They both had a deep dimple like I had, and GT and Neva and Pa. Turns out Uncle Seth had known about this Indian family for quite some time and failed to mention it, which put Pa in a stiff mood with him for some time. But we got acquainted with our half-brothers and sisters, and our wagon got fixed, and we headed up to Fort Phil Kearney. That first night we camped, two of our half-brothers, Blue Crow and He Sleeps, came barreling into our camp with a going-away present, a big fat goose, and they stayed to help us cook it and eat it and spend the night, taught us a game with 3 cups and a field mouse, and it was all a lot of fun. We could talk, translated through Neva, because she knew how to talk with her hands by now, and she was really peeved the next morning when our half-brothers rode off without a goodbye. So on we went. It's getting colder. Uncle Seth's gimpy knee was bothering him, and he wasn't as anxious to find Pa as Ma was. He was driving the mules by now, and he wasn't letting Ma out of his sight. And it was my turn to wonder what Ma was going to do with Pa when she found him. I think she's going to shoot him. That's what I do, said Neva. Well, I don't care what else they do, said GT, just so they don't make no more babies, because I'm sick and tired of running after Marcy. It was almost Christmas when we neared Fort Phil Kearney, and Neva was the first to spot him. He was standing by a wood wagon with an axe in his hand, talking to a young Indian maiden big with child. At first glance, he didn't know what he was seeing. At second glance, he saw his own mules, his own wagon, his own brother, his own children, his own wife. He walked up to the team and said, "What is this, Mary Margaret?" "This is your family, Dick. Your Missouri family, that is." Ma hopped off that wagon, went to stand right in front of him, looked him up and down and said, "I'm not the kind of woman that can quit a man through the mails. I'm the kind of woman that can only quit a man face to face. And right here and right now, I'm quitting you, Dick Cecil." And she slapped him really hard. Came and got back up on the wagon. "You could have sent me up here with that news, Mary Margaret." "I didn't send you because I'm keeping you, Seth, unless you want to stay up here and run wild like your brother." "No, not me," he said. "I'm so used to you by now, Mary Margaret. I don't know what I'd do without you." Well, now some books would end right there, wouldn't they? But I'm a grown man now, and I like a book that tells you what happens next, so I'm going to tell you a brief version. Neva stayed up there with Pa. She was going to shoot him, she said, but she stayed up there with him and Sweetbreads, or Pa's third wife, as Ma called her. And she learned the Sioux language. It was a brilliant career for her. She translated for General Sherman and all the famous people that went up there. She wrote a book about the Indians, got her picture all over New York City, and then some guy named Hearst out the West Coast lured her out there to write for his newspaper, and she didn't come home much. But she did get married. We figured that out because every 2 or 3 years, someone from the railroad station would appear with a small child with a note pinned. Ma, this is Ben. Do your best, Neva. Or whatever name she'd affixed to 6 offspring, which Ma raised with her usual efficiency. Ma and Uncle Seth quarreled their way through 50 more years. He was willed a modest farm from an aunt in Ohio, and before he could sell it, a farmhand dug a post hole too deeply and struck oil. Now, oil wasn't a big deal at the time, but Ma wouldn't let him sell it. That could make us rich someday, she said. And she was right. Baby Marcy had a fine lilting soprano voice. Ma had the money to send her to Europe to get some training. And she sings for the New York Opera. Uncle Seth says her singing reminds him too much of a Cheyenne scalping party. He's not a big fan. GT never married. He got a catfish farm. It was way before his time, and it went bankrupt, and then he became a hellfire preacher, got bitter after that. I happened to find a tattered law book that had fallen off a wagon on the way back to Boonslick, and I pored over those pages for years. Ma finally helped me get to law school, and lawyers weren't as thick on the ground as they are now, but I eventually became the top judge in the Missouri judiciary. So that's my story. That trip, Ma took us on to find Pa, going through storms and bears and Indians. That wasn't the beginning or the end of our family saga, but it did change things for everybody. And that's what stories do. Boonslick ends there. But I want to remind you that that storyteller is gone, but his stories live on. Every single person here is a storyteller. You know stories no one else in the world knows. I want you to write them down. You'll be surprised how important it is to you. I have to tell you one of his stories just quickly. He wrote a book, 2 essay books. They're great. One of them was Walter Benjamin at the Dairy Queen. And he was at the Dairy Queen reading an essay by Walter Benjamin bemoaning the dearth of oral narrative in the last century, storytelling. And Larry McMurtry looked around that Dairy Queen. He said, not here, not in Archer City, not since we got us a Dairy Queen. Because the old men come in the morning, have their coffee, tell their stories over and over, doesn't matter how many times. The women come in the afternoon from the beauty parlor. They tell their stories. I surmise the teenagers came after school and yelled their stories at each other across the Dairy Queen. Not in Archer City, he said. And he ends the book with a story that I've told all year, and now it hurts my heart a little bit because he told a story about Uvalde, Texas, a town that's on our hearts, and we grieve with them. But it was a happier time, he said, when that little college called him there to do a seminar. And he knew that that was the hometown of John Nance Garner at one point, who under Roosevelt had famously said that the vice presidency wasn't worth a boot full of warm spit. As he drove up to the Holiday Inn, he saw the marquee said, "Welcome, Larry McMurtry." author of Terms of Endearment. Oh, that meant so much to me, he wrote. I'd never had anything like that happen before. It meant more to me than the vice presidency had meant to John Nance Garner. The next day, he had a little break in the action, the seminar at the college, and so he came home for a nap and was awakened by his agent, who called to say that he had won the Pulitzer Prize for Lonesome Dove. I can imagine that this curmudgeon got up and splashed some water on his face, ran his wet hands through his hair, straightened his suspenders, went down to meet the press. He was curious, though. He had to look up and see if the marquee had already been changed. It had. Lunch special, catfish, $3.95. If you feel like your stories aren't important to anyone, remember what this famous Texas storyteller did on that occasion. He went and stood in line and got himself a mess of catfish. I love all y'all. God bless you, and God bless Texas. Thank you. Thank you so much.